Hi, and welcome back to Buff's Vintage Bikes. So in this video I'm going to be stepping away from the traditional South African vintage bikes, and I'm going to share a build with you that I've been thinking about doing for quite some time. I was fortunate enough to pick up this Tommasini Prestige some time ago for very little coin. But the bike has lived a hard life, as can be seen on these photos. The frame had some nicks on it, some nasty paint chips, and that group set was a mismatch between Shimano 600, Dura Ace, Diacomp, and who knows what else might be thrown in there. So the frame has been hanging in my rafters for probably about a year as I've thought about how best to build this bike. Part of me wanted to take it back to original spec, with it being a Italian classic and all. And yet the other part of me wanted to go neo-retro on it, because I've been dying to build up a neo-retro bike off of one of the Italian frame sets. And then very recently fate stepped in and made a decision for me, when I managed to pick up a damaged giant TCR running a full Shimano 105 group set for very little coin as well. The only damage on the giant was on the frame, on the downtube. The group set was fine, bar one or two little scratches on the hoods, and the wheel set was fine as well. The only downside is it was a 10-speed grouper where I would have preferred an 11-speed. So back to this Tommasini. What an absolute beauty of an Italian classic. I love the pantography on this bike. Little cutouts on the lugs, the little T represented everywhere. You can see a lot of detail has gone into this bike. And a very unusual paint scheme as well. Black with this splatter effect. I know Tommasini used a marbled effect at one stage, but I haven't seen too many with this paint splatter. Having a look around at bikeforums.net, I'd probably date this bike late 80s, maybe early 90s. If you look at the paint scheme, and also if you consider the cable routing on the top tube as well. As you can see, the paint did have damage, but fortunately with a lot of the Italian bikes you've got a chromed frame to work on. So all I needed to do in most of these instances was touch up the paint, the surrounding paintworks, and I just applied a black enamel to it directly onto the chrome, which bonded very well. And because the frame was black, the touch-ups were extremely difficult to see once I'd completed them. A lot easier than touching up a metallic spray job for sure. So Tommasini built the Super Prestige as well as the Prestige, and in most instances the Super Prestige was sporting Columbus SLX tubing and the Prestige was sporting Columbus SL tubing, although there are a few known differences, or rather not differences but exceptions to this rule. This bike also just so happened to be my size, so it was the perfect base to start this neo-retro build. So for those unsure of what a neo-retro build is, it's basically taking a old frame set, normally with a fork as well, and then building it over with a modern group set. It's to give you the best of both worlds. The modern group set of course allows you things like compact cranks and a wider range of gearing on the rear. So for older guys like me, it sure helps getting up the mountains. I find I can't push the gears I used to in my younger days anymore. I decided to weigh the two group sets just to get an idea of what I was dealing with. And interesting enough, the old group set weighed in somewhat lighter than the newer group set. Those Brifter levers on the 105 were a lot heavier than the old levers. but they sure help when you're climbing hills. The fork here, the chrome fork, wasn't the original Tommasini fork, unfortunately. Due to this, I decided to swap it out with an old carbon percente threaded fork that I'd lying in the cupboard for the past couple of years. I used to use that fork on my Bianchi back in my racing days. It just also happened that the carbon fork was half the weight of the chrome fork. The carbon fork came in at 400 grams as opposed to 800 grams for that chrome fork. So there was quite a weight saving on the bike over there as well. So onto this ding in the top tube that I'm dealing with in the video. Part of me wanted to roll this dent out of the frame using a frame block, but I knew if I went that route I'd damage that paint quite badly on the top tube. And I really liked this paint scheme, so I didn't want to respray this frame entirely. So as a result, I decided to patch up this ding using spot putty and then just touch up the paint by brush as I'd done with all the other smaller spots on the frame itself. This was my first time trying with spot putty, and the only advice I can truly give you is to use really thin layers and let it dry and then build it up from there until you get it to the size that you want it, or rather to the level that you want it. Then you can work at sanding it down to get it as smooth as possible. And then once I had it at the point that I was happy with it, I simply touched it up using black enamel again, and then I got creative with some paint splatter techniques. Here I was using a sacrificial fork that I masked off, and I took a piece of cable that I'd frayed the end, and then I was just dipping it into the enamel and sort of flicking it to try and get that technique that I was after. I can honestly tell you that this was attempt, I've said attempt number 5 on the text, but it's probably a bit more than that. It took a while before I could figure out how to get this technique onto the frame. And then this wasn't the first attempt on the frame either, probably the second attempt before I got it to a state that I was happy with it. But it honestly turned out a little bit better than I expected. And now that the bike's finished, you've got to look long and hard to actually see where the paint damage is on that top tube, which is exactly what I was after. So with the frame sorted out and ready, it was time to move on to the group set. This bike was running an Italian threaded BB, 36 by 24 as you can see there. So it meant I had to get an Italian threaded through axle BB for it. And fortunately our vintage group came to the rescue, and one of the members supplied me with this BB. Just something to note on Italian threaded BBs that they both tighten to the right, so in a clockwise direction, which I'm sure if you're watching this you're probably all aware of. Here's just another look at the straight blade percente fork that I replaced the fork that was on the bike with. To be honest, if the bike was running its original Tommasini fork, I would not have replaced this with a carbon fork. I prefer to keep the fork to match the bike in most instances. And then the giant wheel set obviously wasn't totally suited to the bike, or rather the wheel set was well suited because it was black. Hubs were black as well, spokes black, so the black and white theme carried on through the bike very well. But those giant stickers needed to come off, and my trusty vinyl cutter came to the rescue, and I cut myself some Tommasini stickers. Yes, I apologize to the purist. I know Tommasini never made wheel sets, but this is a neo-retro build, so things are done a little bit differently, and I'll keep these on until I tire of them and then probably put something else on or just leave it straight black. But I think the black on white matched the black on white tires rather well, These tires also I had hanging in the rafters, thought I'd never use them doing vintage bikes, but for this Neo Retro build they actually worked out perfectly. And then it was on to cleaning up the rest of the group set. Generally the group set was in good condition. Previous owner obviously looked after his stuff. However, there were some instances, like on the calipers on the springs, where rust had crept in. So I pulled it all apart and then just took my time cleaning up each little piece as best as possible to getting them looking as close to new again. Most parts turned out really well. So before I keep quiet and let you enjoy the rest of this build in peace and quiet, if you enjoy my content, please subscribe to my channel. It would be great to have you on board. And do me a favor and give this video a like as well, please, if you're enjoying it. I sure enjoyed the build process, and I've got a feeling this won't be my last Neo Retro build. So as this video closes out, let me know what you think of the build in the comment section, please. My first attempt at a Neo Retro, and I'm rather pleased with how it turned out. Actually, that's an understatement. I'm extremely happy with how it turned out. I took the bike out this past weekend on its first 65-kilometer trip around the Cape Peninsula, and the combination of the steel frame and the modern group set just works so well. The steel frame, even with the carbon fork, absolutely soaks up the bumps. It is such a comfortable bike to ride. The geometry is just perfect for me, and I can see me using this bike a lot in the future. Thanks for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it encourages you to try build your own Neo Retro bike. Take care out there, keep safe and healthy. Till the next time. Ruby.